The desert air shimmered with heat, the kind that turned metal into fire and men into ghosts. The A-10 Thunderbolt Roman II, the Hog, sat under the scorching Afghan sun, its gray skin marred by soot and bullet holes. Around it, a crew of young airmen worked in sluggish rhythm, sweat cutting paths down their dust-covered faces. Near the tail, crouched alone beneath the engine nacelle, was Chief Warrant Officer Mara Hensley. Her hands moved with precision, tightening a stripped bolt that others had given up on hours ago. Her hair, streaked with silver, was tied back beneath a grease-stained cap. Her uniform bore no shine, no rank pins, just the faint scars of years spent where the heat and the noise were unrelenting. "Hey, maintenance, you miss a spot," someone shouted from across the tarmac, laughter echoing behind him. A few of the younger crewmen chuckled, not out of cruelty, but ignorance. Mara didn't look up. She'd heard every version of that joke for 20 years. To them, she was invisible, a background worker in a world that worshipped pilots. They didn't know her file, her medals, the blacked-out missions that never made the reports. They didn't know that once, long ago, she'd flown the very aircraft she now repaired. The captain walked by Danvers, young and sharp, his boots too clean, his tone always clipped with command. He paused, watching her work. "You've been under that hog all morning, Chief. My pilots are on stand. By. How much longer?" His words carried the edge of impatience, the kind that came from not understanding the difference between fixing and surviving. Mara slid out from under the plane, eyes squinting against the glare. Her face was weathered but calm, a canvas of quiet strength. "She'll be ready when she stops bleeding oil," she said simply, wiping her hands on a rag. Danvers frowned, glancing at her uniform. "Maintenance crews aren't cleared to talk to officers like that. Remember your place." She looked at him, expression unreadable, and turned back to her tools. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the slow hum of distant engines. One of the mechanics, a fresh recruit, leaned toward another. "She's old school," he whispered. "They say she's been here since before most of us were born." The other snorted. "Yeah, and I heard she once crashed a hog herself. Probably why she's stuck fixing them now." The words hung in the air, drifting toward her like shrapnel. Mara didn't react. She never did. Her silence was her armor, and silence had kept her alive longer than most. But then, as she reached into the open panel, a torn sleeve brushed against her arm. For the first time that day, Captain Danvers noticed the faded patch stitched into her undershirt, the unmistakable symbol of the 74th Fighter Squadron, the Flying Tigers. The same unit whose pilots carried a reputation that still echoed in military halls. Ruthless precision, impossible bravery, and one mission in particular that no one spoke of but everyone knew. One where a downed hog flew home with half a wing missing and a pilot covered in blood. Danvers froze. The laughter around them faded. His eyes lingered on the patch, realization dawning too late. The veteran he'd been scolding wasn't just maintenance. She was part of the legend whispered through every airbase he'd ever trained in. Mara noticed the shift in his stare. She quietly closed the panel, stood, and picked up her wrench. "She'll fly," she said softly, eyes never leaving the hog. "They always do when you treat them right." Then she walked past him without waiting for approval. Danvers watched her go, the weight of shame pressing into his chest. The other airmen looked between him and the plane, uneasy now. The sun beat down harder, and in that silence, the air seemed heavier. Something in the base had changed, not in noise, but in the kind of silence that comes when truth finally enters the room. That night, long after the hangar lights dimmed, Mara stayed behind. Alone with the aircraft, she ran her fingers along the bullet scars on its fuselage. Her reflection stared back tired eyes, trembling hands, the ghosts of every flight she'd survived. Somewhere in her chest, the old ache stirred again, the one she thought she'd buried years ago. The need to fly not for glory, not for rank, but to remember who she'd once been. Outside, a storm gathered over the horizon. The kind that grounded flights and unearthed memories, and Mara, standing in the half-light, didn't look away. The next morning began with a sound that no soldier ever forgets, a low, distant thud that turns the air to stone. The base sirens screamed seconds later. Dust leapt off the ground as mortars began to fall beyond the perimeter wall. Inside the hangar, mechanics scrambled for cover, tools clattering across the concrete floor. The A-10s lined in a row looked like sleeping giants caught mid-dream. Mara dropped the wrench she was holding and scanned the sky through the open bay doors. Smoke curled upward from the east ridge. A supply convoy ambushed just beyond the base. Through the static of the comms, broken voices shouted for backup. Words like trapped, under fire, and no air support available crackled over the channel. She didn't need to ask who was out there. She already knew. Captain Danvers stumbled in, his uniform half-buttoned, panic written across his face. "All our pilots are grounded," he barked to the chief controller. "2 down with heat stroke, 1 injured during yesterday's sortie. The rest are still being debriefed. Who's cleared for flight?" No one answered. The hangar filled with the hum of fear, the kind that silences even trained soldiers. Mara stepped out from behind the hog, wiping her hands on a rag that was more dirt than cloth. "The hog's ready," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the chaos. Fuels topped, cannons armed, hydraulics sealed. Danvers turned toward her, almost offended by her calm. "Chief, that's not the point. I said pilots, your maintenance." She met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "Then I guess maintenance will have to do." The room froze. The airmen stopped moving, eyes darting between them. For a second, no one breathed. Danvers blinked, disbelief and anger mixing with confusion. "You're not authorized. You're not." But she was already walking toward the aircraft, steps sure and slow, like someone walking toward a memory instead of a machine. She placed a hand on the cold metal skin of the hog, and for the first time in years, her voice carried something fragile, something alive. "I still remember the codes," she said softly. Danvers followed, his tone rising. "You don't understand. If that thing leaves the ground without clearance, it's my head, not yours." She looked back at him, the faintest shadow of a smile touching her lips. "Then you'd better make sure it comes back." Before he could answer, she climbed the ladder and dropped into the cockpit. The smell of oil and worn leather filled her lungs, the same scent she'd lived with through 3 wars. Her hands hovered over the controls like they were greeting old friends. For a moment, the world outside fell away. The shouting, the sirens, the heat. It was just her and the hog. The control tower crackled to life. All runways under threat. Repeat, under threat. Ground personnel stay put. Danvers stared at the aircraft, torn between protocol and instinct. Then he saw it, the faded patch on her sleeve, the tiger's head still glaring through years of wear. Something inside him shifted. He took a deep breath and whispered, almost to himself, "God help us." The turbines roared to life, shaking the hangar walls. Airmen backed away, shielding their eyes from the dust. The hog rolled forward, heavy and alive, the engines screaming like they'd been waiting for her return. Mara's hands moved without hesitation, throttle, flaps, fuel check. Every motion was muscle memory carved from a past she'd tried to forget. Outside, the storm that had been building the night before finally broke. Wind whipped across the tarmac, carrying sand in waves that blurred the horizon. She guided the hog through it, eyes sharp and calm. Lightning flashed behind her as the plane accelerated down the strip, wheels leaving the ground just as another explosion hit near the outer wall. From the ground, the crew watched in disbelief. The old mechanic had just taken off in a war machine meant for a younger generation. But as she banked toward the ridge, the truth hit them. She wasn't flying to prove something. She was flying because no one else could. In the cockpit, Mara's breath steadied. The radio crackled again. Static, then voices, faint and broken. "This is Convoy Delta, pinned near the canyon road, taking fire from the ridgeline." She adjusted the frequency, her fingers trembling for only a second. "This is Hog 1, she said, The words came out quiet but sharp, carrying authority that made every man on that channel stop talking. "Mark your position with smoke." There was silence, then a stunned reply. "Hog 1. That call sign's retired. Who the hell is this?" She exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing as she spotted a plume of red smoke rising from the canyon. Someone who's not done yet. The sky split open as the hog dove into the valley. The canyon walls closed in around her like jagged teeth, the shadows cutting across the cockpit in flashes of light and darkness. Mara steadied the controls, the stick trembling in her grip as she banked low through the narrow pass. The ground fire began almost immediately, sharp bursts of tracer rounds tearing through the air around her. Each bullet was a streak of fire against the pale morning sky, but she didn't flinch. She'd flown through worse, over mountains where the air froze her lungs, through deserts where the heat bent the horizon, across cities where every rooftop spat death. Her eyes scanned the terrain ahead, trained to see what others missed. 3 technicals hidden along the ridge, 2 mortar positions dug into the cliffs, and movement the kind that only comes from men who think they're invisible. She tightened her jaw. "I see you," she murmured. The comms crackled again. "Hog 1, they've got us boxed in. We can't." The voice cut out in static. She could see the convoy now, burning vehicles, pinned soldiers taking cover behind twisted metal. Time wasn't on their side. Mara's hand slid over the throttle. The engines roared in response. She pulled the hog into a climb, her heartbeat syncing with the vibration of the machine. For a moment, it felt like breathing again. Then she rolled over, inverted, and came down in a dive so steep it pressed her into the seat. The canyon tilted beneath her, the target locked in her sights. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The Ju-8 cannon thundered. The earth below seemed to erupt in waves, dust, flame, and metal flying in every direction. The ridge collapsed under the barrage, enemy vehicles splitting open like tin under the force of her strike. She didn't stop. One pass, then another and another, until the radio filled with cheers and disbelief. "Whoever you are, keep it coming. That's one hell of a run." But she wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, calm, precise, unshaken. There was no thrill in what she did, just purpose. Every round fired was another ghost laid to rest. Every maneuver was for someone who never made it home. Her ammo warning blinked red. She leveled out, scanning the canyon below. Silence. Smoke rose in pillars where the enemy had been. The convoy was moving again. She could hear their gratitude over the comms, voices breaking with relief, but she said nothing. Words had never been her way. She turned the hog toward base, the sky now streaked with the pink of late afternoon. Her body ached, old wounds reminding her they still existed. As she approached, she saw the airstrip crowded with people. Mechanics, officers, medics, all staring up as the A-10 circled once before landing. The tires hit the tarmac with a heavy screech, the plane slowing, then rolling to a stop. When the canopy opened, the wind hit her face. The world outside felt louder now, the cheers, the footsteps running toward her, the shouts of disbelief. Danvers stood at the front of them, hands on his head, eyes wide. "You actually..." He couldn't finish. Mara climbed down the ladder, boots hitting the ground softly. Her uniform was streaked with oil, sweat, and smoke. The same patch, the flying tiger, caught the sunlight as she stepped forward. The base fell silent, the kind of silence that demanded respect. Danvers took a hesitant step toward her. "You saved them," he said quietly. "You saved all of them." She looked at him, eyes steady, and gave a small nod. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The hog did." Then she turned, walking past the stunned crowd back toward the hangar. Behind her, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the runway. The young airmen watched in silence, the laughter of the day before replaced with something else, reverence. They'd seen what she carried inside her silence, what she had buried beneath grease and duty. Later that night, when the hangar lights dimmed again, Mara stood alone beside the aircraft. The metal still radiated warmth from the flight. She touched it gently, fingers tracing the scratches on its skin like old scars. "We're not just machines, are we?" she whispered. In the reflection of the Hog's fuselage, she saw herself older, quieter, but finally whole. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her past settle without pain. The ghosts were quiet now. Outside, the wind swept through the base, carrying sand and silence in equal measure. Somewhere far off, a new pilot trained under the same stars that had guided her once. And though no one said it aloud, every person on that airfield would remember that day, the day the woman they called just maintenance reminded them what flying really meant. When dawn came, the Hog gleamed under the rising sun. It stood ready, silent and proud, like its pilot. And as the world moved on, one truth lingered quietly in the air, unspoken but felt by everyone who'd seen her fly. Some legends don't retire. They just wait for the sky to call them back.